So thank you both for being here today. And as you heard earlier, we've got about 30 minutes for both the presentation and the Q&A time. So we try to figure it's about 50-50 as far as time-wise. So you are on, Malcolm.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you, commissioners and budget committee members. With me today is Chief Deputy Jenna Morrison, and also available on Zoom is our financial analyst, Judy Anderson-Smith, who transitioned to taking over the community corrections budget just prior to the ice storm when we had a retirement of Nora Jones, who some of you may recall that did the previous budget. So she's done an amazing job of jumping in with about 2 weeks of crossover, barely, in the midst of an ice storm. So she's really worked well, and I appreciate the budget team's support with her transition. Before I get started, just a refresher on community corrections budget, the primary funding source being from the state. This is the legislative session, and the community corrections primary funding will not be set until session is done. We'll talk more about those obstacles when I get to the end of my slideshow, but I think it's important to start with that. I base the budget based on the revenue we got 2 years ago at the beginning of the last biennium. But I prepare for various scenarios going through the year based on what we see legislatively. Let's start with the good work that community corrections does. Before I actually start with what I've put up for accomplishments, we really want to give credit to community corrections staff for being resilient through this time, for stepping up and working outside of their typical job tasks. Specifically during the wildfires, we called upon parole and probation officers to do notifications, to work side by side with patrol deputies out there going door to door amongst the fires, notifying residents to evacuate and assisting with the evacuations. They stepped up. They were more than ready to come out and assist and help the community. We had numerous other community corrections staff help with EOCs, both the Sheriff's Office EOC and the County EOC, and other staff just help support the operation itself. But we had parole and probation officers doing out all night, manning checkpoints to make sure the community was safe, not their normal tasks. Going door to door, doing home visits, they're really efficient at, and they showed that in this. In the midst of a wildfire, that was new for them, but they really stepped up to the plate. Our residential and treatment program continues to run through COVID. And they've done amazing work. But on top of that, dealing with the fires, the wildfires, coming to work, dealing with the ice storm for a 24-hour facility. I'll say the one blessing of this ice storm is Milwaukee kept power, where our residential treatment facility is. That was a blessing. We did not have to cross that bridge of not having power, like many of us managed to make it through for many days without power. But that one program for community corrections did not, fortunately, have to deal with that. But staff have been resilient through it all and have really stepped up the plate and continue to do amazing work. Let's start in with the major accomplishments. I think it's always important to highlight the work we do in providing housing. We've provided, again this year, over 278 individuals with transitional housing, specifically 161 of those released from prison. 32 of those were jail releases in what has been a 17-year commitment or partnership with Bridges to Change for transitional housing. We ensure no one releasing from prison will go homeless and be on the street. We know that is setting up someone releasing from prison for failure, and often setting them up for the additional recidivism and committing additional crimes. Secondly, we've continued to provide supportive mental health housing. You may recall last year, I cut supportive mental health housing from our budget. H3S, all divisions of H3S stood up and helped keep this program going. This is housing for 81 seriously mental individuals that may be releasing from prison, from jail, or just from the community that need stabilization. Everywhere from behavioral health to health centers to the housing authorities helped keep this going. And we're still looking for ways to keep it going. But they stepped up and provided funding. They realized the importance of it, and I'm continuing to look for ways to fund it as we go into a new budget year. There's some unknowns with that. but I want to thank them for their partnership. One major challenge this year for those releasing from prisons, as many of you saw, DOC facilities had widespread outbreaks of COVID. That meant individuals were releasing with either an exposure or COVID positive and needed quarantine. I will thank the county commissioners for providing funding for quarantine housing. They partnered with Washington County. We had a hotel there that provided wraparound services. So we were able to build a transition plan for individuals to quarantine for 2 weeks and then transition into our traditional housing or where else they may have needed to go. That would have been a major obstacle that would be very difficult to accomplish any other way without that resource. And planning releases for individuals from all over the state, because transportation, there was a major challenge and there was lots of obstacles with the Department of Corrections. Fortunately, the Department of Corrections did step up and partnered with the local counties and community corrections agencies to make it happen. Another accomplishment for this year is community corrections applied for impacts, which is improving people's access to community-based treatment supports and services. This was initiated in the prior legislative session, and this Criminal Justice Commission is facilitating the grant. It, for us, has provided an additional, COVID has kind of put some obstacles to it initially, getting started up, but provides additional funding for housing, additional funding for crisis, access to phones, so we can really impact a small population of those under community supervision that are frequent utilizers of the justice system and suffering from a severe mental illness or severe and persistent mental illness, and find better ways to engage with them. We have continued to operate CSAP during the various COVID challenges on a far reduced, due to COVID protocols, number of individuals that we can house safely. They've done an amazing job of keeping that program going and safe and healthy. And most of our clients at this point have been willing to be vaccinated that are in the program. Definitely challenges in this environment to keep the program going, keep participants interested in being there. Sometimes is a challenge because of all the restrictions, but our staff have done an amazing job of keeping the program, and results continue to be positive for those that want to engage in the program and those in the community moving forward. Next slide, please. Just a highlight of some of our measurements, but for CSAP specifically, we measure clients who have successfully completed CSAP and not get arrested of a new drug or alcohol related crime, and we're at a 90%, which far exceeds our target. And this is 1 year after completion. Though that may be harder to measure, I'll call it out now with ballot measure 110, what we look at, but often we can associate an arrest and look at it to see if there was a substance abuse related crime with that. We also have a target of reducing overdose deaths amongst our clients. Of course, the goal is going to be 0. We're at 2 for this so far this fiscal year. I will tell you it's incredibly hard to measure. This amongst our clients' data is a challenge, but we do everything we can to measure that accurately. We have a target of 20% reduction in new criminal convictions of those on parole and probation within a year of ending their supervision. We're seeing a 2% increase from our target, which equates to 29 new arrests for the 462 that left supervision. Our target was measured based on 618 that left supervision with 38 new arrests. Again, this is our own measurement to track how we are doing specifically. There's many measures of recidivism, but we're looking at those that specifically leave supervision in Clackamas County and that return with a new conviction to supervision in Clackamas County. Next slide. a general overview of our programs. Many of our programs, their specific results flow into our strategic results. And I won't focus too much on the funding at this point. We'll talk more about that at the end. Next slide. Overall, 75% of our funding is outside of general fund. The majority comes from the state Department of Corrections to fund the supervision of individuals on felony probation or post-prison supervision. There was a provision for misdemeanor PCS to fund that. So we still have some of those cases on supervision. But I will tell you, the majority of those have gone away and are going away due to ballot measure 110. Our general fund that supports here in Clackamas County, specifically the supervision of misdemeanor domestic violence crimes, misdemeanor sex offense crimes, and DUI monitoring. We are unique in the fact that Clackamas County does fund domestic violence, and they've done that for a long time. We are hopeful that Senate Bill 497 will move through and the state will take over funding a portion of those. But we still have a little ways to go legislatively, but it is making progress. That would offset some of our expenditures really over a 4-year period, so 2 bienniums. There's a small amount of money that would come in this biennium should Senate Bill 497 pass, and then we'd look 2 years out to really cover our costs fully. Next slide. So in our beginning balance, I will point out that about 1.1 million of that is justice reinvestment funding. That 1.1 million funds the program until December. Justice reinvestment is funded every 2 years on the biennium, and it starts in December. Essentially, we will be applying for justice reinvestment. Well, we are already starting the process, but we'll know funding in July, and it will be due the end of August. And if we're awarded it again, it will be funded starting in December. So the remaining is carryover moving into the next budget year. Next slide. And let's go to the next slide, and then I'm sure there will be questions after I talk about our obstacles. So, as I said, we rely mostly on Department of Corrections funding, and this is legislative session, and the governor's budget was severely reduced due to ballot measure 110, down to 44 million, and then again reduced because the overall community corrections population statewide has dramatically reduced. Most likely due to COVID and ballot measure 110. So with less people on supervision, there's less money. Our specific population was on a downward trend prior to COVID, has been for a number of years. I think I referred to it last budget session. Actually, pre-COVID spiked and went up. COVID hit, it dropped off again, which means our portion of the community corrections funding went from 5.67 to 5.65, so there was, which is a positive. It certainly could have dropped more, which would have been less money for Clackamas County when the final budget is done. I don't know what the impact is. I can forecast what the worst case impact is, which is about $1 million less. As you see, I have a number of FTE vacant. We've cut 2 positions this year out of the budget, and there is 7 that show vacant. And those vacancies are to provide a way to absorb the reductions in state funding. We have less people on supervision in Clackamas County today than we did a year ago, approximately about 500 less. There's been a drop. Ballot measure 110 is a part of that. COVID's the other piece of it. I expect to see at least another 100 PCS cases filter off supervision. And then, as you heard the DA talk about how the workload will be, and will those be more cases for us in the future? Possibly. I think there's a lot of unknown. We're hopeful that legislators will provide the overall community corrections state budget, $25.6 million, which will reduce the impact of community corrections here in Clackamas County down to about a $250,000 shortfall for a year, about $500,000 over a 2-year period. There's lots of positive talk from legislators. We did not get additional community corrections funding 2 years ago. And they realized they didn't provide us that funding. They want to see the good work continue that we do. And so I'm hopeful that funding will come in. But I can't rely on that. That's why I built cushion. And I have additional vacancies. As of today, there's 2 additional. I had one in the end of May and one just today. So lots of unknowns in relying on legislative session, which is not unfamiliar to me. We're hopeful we'll have answers earlier rather than later if session is done by June 18th. But questions?
Commissioner Fisher, and then Ms. Caldwell, and then Mr. Scholl, or excuse me, Commissioner Scholl.
Shall I go?
You're up.
Okay, thank you. So I'm interested in your performance measures, and one of them, by 2023, 40% of residential clients who've successfully completed CSAP will not get arrested on a new alcohol or drug charge. And it looks like the projected performance is 91%.
Correct.
For this time, which seems to be really great. And then I'm curious that the target is 40%, and I'm just wondering why there's that much of a discrepancy on what the goal is and are over succeeding the goal.
Well, when we put this, we wanted to actually see where the targets for the line have some years behind us. So we were set at a point that we thought we could achieve. It's exceeded that. It's really going to be difficult to tell with COVID at this point if that's going to be a realistic number of 91% continuing forward. And we're going to continue to evaluate it. I also will have to look at the measure itself, because being arrested on a PCS is no longer a crime, so they will not be arrested at PCS, so it would be a higher level crime, and how we accurately measure that moving forward. But historically, our CSAP graduates have done very well in the community. I'll relate some stories. Our program for many of these graduates is so important that when they are struggling, they come back, and the door is open to them. Most recently, I was at a staff meeting, and CSAP staff let me know we had an individual move back from Seattle so they could come back into the program. They needed help. There's a number of individuals and graduates that over COVID have struggled, and we've brought them back into the program. They're familiar with the program, treatment staff are familiar with them, and we'll work with them. So historically, there's been a lot of success, but I want to make sure that we have enough data to have an accurate target, so we don't set ourselves up, for automatic failure moving forward, moving out of COVID.
Okay. Do you see, since the, I guess an alcohol charge would be an alcohol charge, but
Yeah.
a drug charge, do you see changing that metric?
It's something for us to look at, what that would be outside of a more severe level drug charge like delivery, or a drug-related charge, or somehow that the conviction has a substance abuse connection to it.
And then I'm also interested, mostly because I went on a ride-along with Amy Jo Cook, and the first part of the day was seeing the overdose stack that she had in her hand, which I don't know how many there were, but there were more than I felt like that's a great way for her to start her day. But I see that we're projecting 2 for this year, 0 hopefully for next year, and that the target is 0. I'm just curious if you can just talk a little bit more about that issue as it comes to your population.
So opioid and opioid addiction is common amongst ours, and actually it's a polysubstance, more common than anything between meth and opioids. We have an active Narcan distribution, make Narcan available to all our clients, education, treatment, of course, to help prevent overdose deaths, along with partnering with the jail, so anyone releasing from jail that is at high risk for opioid or known opioid addiction is provided Narcan. So that's one of our major initiatives. Obviously, engaging them in treatment is the number one goal, but that's not always realistic. MAT, medication-assisted treatment, is a goal for any opioid, anyone suffering from an opioid addiction, and that can start while they're in custody in the jail. We have a BJA grant that Community Corrections has in partnership with the jail, where we have a MAT coordinator working with individuals who are incarcerated that are known or need assistance and transitioning them back in the community. That may be those on community supervision, and it may be those that are not. So we're always looking ways. Health Centers has done amazing work in ensuring MAT is available in Clackamas County, but treatment resources in Clackamas County have always been a struggle. Ballot Measure 110 will hopefully provide for those that are not on community supervision. You shouldn't have to be on parole or probation to get treatment services or to get assistance in dealing with your opioid addiction or help to avoid an opioid death. Excuse me, I'm gonna have some water.
Well, thank you for that answer. I just know that we have done so much in Clackamas County to address the issue, and so I really appreciate the update and really support us moving forward in a way that's preventative, and I know it's an astronomical problem, so.
It is, and it keeps changing. So just to add to that, we're seeing an ever increasing of counterfeit fentanyl pills is the new trend. So you'll see more and more of that information. There's been media releases about it throughout the Tri-County area of opioid addiction. So I'm seeing it as a transition to a new type of opioid.
Ms. Caldwell and then Commissioner Shull.
Thank you. You talked a little bit about state revenue and your percentage share of the total. Even though it's decreasing because of Measure 110 in total, what's going on with your percentage share? Is that stable?
Fortunately, it dropped. It went from 5.67 to 5.65, so a very minor drop.
Minor drop.
So when we know the total amount, so that's helpful. I didn't find out that percentage, as I know that you're aware of how the community corrections budgeting works from your prior work at Multnomah County. So that helped me calculate what the various scenarios could be when the total amount of money is known.
And do your costs decrease proportionate to any decrease in that percentage? In other words, is that reflective of you having less?
Caldwell, could you talk into the microphone?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
If your percentage decreases and you're losing revenue as a result, is that proportionate to a reduction in your cost?
Since we have vacancies, yes. But overall, our costs continue to go up to supervise the population, and the amount of money needed to supervise community corrections clients, 25.6 is half of what we identified the actual cost was statewide, as far as 25.6 million statewide. The cost study identified that it was more on the lines of 50 million to fund community corrections adequately, to fund the cost of supervising the medium high-risk individuals and providing the necessary services they need.
Yeah, actual cost is kind of a fluid
Yes.
definition I found. My next question has to do with you talked about the mental health treatment beds that you lost last year. And I had a question for H3S, whether the Metro money that was new could be applied to your population. I don't know if that's part of what you're using for the supportive housing. Is that in play?
That is in play in my conversations with them on that, and to find a way to, if that money truly becomes available, to utilize and support the housing and wraparound services we currently pay for. That would be great if those would pay for mental health. Those Serenity and Haven is a priority for for community corrections and H3S working together, and that's one avenue that we're hoping to help with those programs, but all our housing programs with wraparound services.
And is treatment, particularly for criminogenic kinds of things, is treatment included in that housing, or is that strictly?
That housing is strictly wraparound services, so a house manager and specially trained peer mentors for the mental health population. And then treatment is often done through providers or behavioral health.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a picture of all of these variables you're working with and what it's really doing to service level versus, what you're getting versus what you need. It's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on in getting all those that work with our population, provide treatment, whether that's substance abuse treatment or behavioral health treatment, working together and sharing information is a challenge. But here in Clackamas County, behavioral health and health centers has been at the table with us to find solutions for all our programs and ensure that community corrections clients, who are often the highest utilizers of all the systems, become the priority and get the services and treatment they need.
Yeah, and slightly different than the general population.
Yes, the criminality side of it makes them much more challenging.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shaw?
Yes, Captain Malcolm. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
On your mental health stabilization housing, is that funded by your office or by H3S? Question number one. And the question number two is, on your 1.7% reduction on your general fund funding, did you tell us how that came about? It's not very much. It's only $80,000, but I'm just curious how that came down. Why did that come down?
Well, let's start with the easy question. The housing historically has been funded by community corrections. So Serenity, we refer to it as Serenity and Haven House, the mental health stabilization. Last budget year, I had to cut that. H3S provided, we'll call it bridge funding for me to continue to operate the program over the last year in a variety of different sources and to keep that going. So currently there is no funding identified for it. I'm working with H3S, and we had a concept, but as Ms. Caldwell brought up about the supportive housing services, those have been the conversations. I'm also waiting to see what legislative session brings me fiscally, whether I can provide, if there's a gap between what the final outcome of the supportive housing services is, and I'm looking for any way to fund it possible not to shut it down. It's been very successful and is an important resource for our mental health, those suffering from mental illness that are also on community supervision in Clackamas County. The 1% reduction,
1.7.
1.7, and I don't have an answer off the top. I could refer, I don't know if anyone from budget can help me, or we can bring Judy in on Zoom.
Captain Malcolm, you can just give me a reason later on.
Okay.
I just have one more question to bounce off you. I don't need an answer today, but if Clackamas County had a mental health and substance abuse intake facility, what positive impact would that have on your budget? Let's talk about that another day.
I'd be happy to talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other questions for Malcolm and Jenna today? No? Not seeing any. Thank you very much for your presentation and alerting us to the issues that are out there. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your support. Have a great day.